Well, hey everyone, and welcome to our first of 3 class breakdowns, starting with the Realm of the Vikings. So, what do you have in mind when selecting the Realm of the Vikings in a new game? Nordic mythology, trolls, barbarians, snow and cold, right? Fair enough. But Camelot Unchained goes far deeper and with more complexity in every of each class in that aspect. The Vikings are gruesome, violent and savages. Violence is the answer to any question. It's about who can hit the hardest and cause the most damage on the opponents and leave a bloody mess. Anyone who watches the Viking series on the History Channel, for example, can attest to that. We have 5 races to pick from the Vikings. The Olveonoir, the Dverga, the Valkyrie, Vikings and Jotnar. Behind every aspect in the game there's rich lore to discover, so if you are into that, you can check the CamelotUnchained.com website where you can discover many pages of lore. As to the races themselves, here's a short excerpt to them. The Ulfhirnar, known as Berserkers, the Ulfhirnar watch for Ragnarok and the ending of the world. They believe they were born for war and their battle rage is legendary, as well as the long recovery they require afterward. The Dverga, the noble Dverga are born deep within the earth and the land they call the inner world. Though they love the good joke or even a bad one, the Dverga are staunch warriors and sturdy defenders who bring great bravery and determination to the battlefield. The Valkyrie, though their race was born of great suffering and tragedy, the Valkyrie have risen high above their past on hidden wings of magic. Some of the Valkyrie can truly fly with their delicate wings, others glide overhead. The Vikings, explorers and mighty warriors of legend, the Vikings are hungry for battle, hungry for plunder, and starving to rule by the right of conquest. And as last, the Jotnar, a large and imposing people infused with ice. The blue-skinned Jotnar are known as frost giants. As they age, they literally get bigger, stronger and tougher, and even more frightening to behold on the battlefield. So, as we know, we have 30 classes in this game, plus 1, which is a crafter class, 31. Each realm has 10 classes. Before starting with them, let me say that all the styles and skills I'm about to present you are samples that might change until release, until beta, etc. Let's start off with Arisen. The Arisen is a melee scout support class that applies enemy debuffs. It sacrifices himself in order to arise. This appears to be a self-buff that will take place once you die. If you forgot to perform the sacrificial ritual, you will not enter the Arisen form. So once you are in the Arisen form, you cause panic rating to nearby enemies, which increases over time. In this form you gain high concealment and health regeneration. Also your abilities will change once you are in the Arisen form. Next we go over to the Child of Loki, a Shapeshifter. This is a melee to close range class. This class can transform into 3 different shapes. Gift of Fenrir, a wolf, Gift of Sleipnir, a horse, and Gift of Jormungandr, a snake. Each of those shapes grant the user complete different abilities. The Gift of Fenrir. While being in wolf form, you are capable of stealing health and when attacking. You will do piercing damage and penetrate the enemy's target armor, and providing group chaos buffs using howls. You also apply chaos debuffs while attacking. Gift of Sleipnir. While being in wolf form, you are capable of increased movement speed and charging attacks that can deal crushing damage and knock back enemies. You can channel movement speed for a brief duration and apply this to one of your allies as long as they stay in range. Gift of Jormungandr. While being in snake form, you are capable of doing piercing attack damage that applies poison damage when penetrating the target's armor. If this attack penetrates the target's armor and a poison debuff is not present, it applies a poison damage over time debuff to the target. Poison damage dealt by this debuff is increased based on the remaining health of the target's affected body part. So the Shapeshifter class sounds really interesting to me because there are synergies between each form. For example, as a wolf, you would do bonus damage if the target has been poisoned before, and vice versa, you do increased poison damage and over time poison damage if the target has been penetrated before. Next we go to the Helbound. The Helbound is a DPS/healer hybrid class. Essentially this class is able to switch between 2 stances. Aspect of Life and Aspect of Death. When entering Aspect of Life, it is reducing all resistances and building life force over time. Life abilities additionally grant a protection which reduces the damage taken by the target based on the amount of health they are missing. When entering the Aspect of Death, it is increasing all resistances and building death force over time. Death abilities additionally inflict a vulnerability which increases the power of death abilities the target is affected by. The power of these vulnerabilities increases each time the target is affected by a death ability, up to a maximum amount over a moderate duration. So you deal damage based on enemies missing health and heal nearby group members based on remaining health. Also, when switching stances, you cause a large amount of panic to nearby enemies and deal damage to them based on the resulting panic attack rating. Speaking, you debuff them, basically. Our next class is a Mjolnir. The Mjolnir is a heavy fighter melee to short range class. He has active damage mitigation skills and can cause lightning attacks around his hammer. He will be a heavy melee fighter with disruptive abilities. Using storms will increase his lightning damage and stamina regeneration. The use of lightning attacks grants a physical buff that increases movement speed and damage mitigation. Going over to the Shadowwalker. The Shadowwalker is a melee-based group-oriented stealther. He applies debuffs to multiple targets that slows their movement speed and applies a panic debuff which lets enemies take more damage. Once the debuff expires, the target's vision is greatly reduced. The Shadowwalker is the most effective at nighttime, since he gains increased movement speed and reduced preparation time, recovery time and stamina costs for abilities at night. Next we go to the Skald. The Skald is a melee-based support class. The Skald uses chants and auras to buff his real mains and debuff enemy players. The longer they chants to remain active, the more powerful they become. He will have the usual chants, such as the speed song, a defensive song that reduces incoming damage, and also suppresses a death for a short amount of time for players under this effect before they die. The power of the buff is based on the number of nearby enemies, if they are greater than the number of group members present. Going forward with the Slaughterwolf. The Slaughterwolf is a DPS mage pet class. He casts spirit wolves that only obey commands within a limited distance of the user. Beyond this distance, spirit wolves act independently, following their own desires. They are the strongest pets in the game. Use of spirit wolf abilities grants the user a copy of the buff effect each wolf carries with it for a brief period of time. Once summoned, they begin to fade, losing health over time. When a spirit wolf begins running low on health, he will stop to feed on nearby corpses to restore health. Corpses may be fed upon only once. He can cast two types of wolves. He can cast frost wolves, which will deal frost damage and slashing damage. It also grants a frost resistance buff, and their attacks on enemies cause a frost debuff, which increases the attacker's ability preparation and recovery times, and reduces their movement speed for a brief period of time. Then he can also cast fire wolves, which deal fire damage and slash damage to its attacks. It gains a fire resistance buff and inflicts fire debuff, fire damage over time on enemies. Next we go to the Stonehealer. The Stonehealer is a pure healer class that throws smaller stones on its allies to heal them, and can also place rocks on the ground which cause AoE heals. If the enemy destroys a stone, the healer will take damage. There was not much more information rather than that about this class, so I'm excited to see what other abilities this class is gonna have. So onwards on the Wave Weaver. This is a mage with a strong burst DPS and control abilities. The Wave Weaver is the strongest near water. Being near water greatly reduces the cost of water-based abilities and increases their effectiveness. He can slow enemies down and debuff them, increasing their preparation time and ability activation time by a large amount. Coming to our last class for the Vikings, the Winter Shadow. The Winter Shadow is an archer with mid-range to melee DPS abilities. He has the shortest range compared to the other archers on other realms, but makes up for it with their battle, survival and skirmisher skills, which are very impressive. This archer is a high mobility class that can switch between bow and shield and a melee weapon, able to block attacks and slam their targets. He can also cast a snowstorm, dealing frost damage over time to nearby enemies. Enemies who remain in the storm for more than a brief duration are affected by a frost debuff that reduces their movement speed for a duration based on their time within the storm. Group members within the storm gain a frost debuff that increases their movement speed for a duration based on their time within the storm. So this class sounds to me as a perfect ganker class, because he has high mobility, he can switch between slam and range weapon, and in case he's getting chased by multiple enemies, he can just cast a snowstorm, which is pretty cool. Alright folks, this was a long one. This concludes the class breakdown for the Vikings realm. What are your thoughts on the realm? What class are you going to play and why? Let me know in the comments. And as always, please like and subscribe if you like the content. Next week we'll do the Tuatha De Danann. Thanks and peace out.